Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to From Time Saved to Time Well Spent. Is AI a path to thriving or just more pressure? We're here to ask what happens when AI gives lawyers back their time. Do we use it to breathe, to grow, or to just do more? Joining me today are three brilliant panelists. We have Elizabeth Rimmer, CEO of LawCare, championing mental health and culture change across the profession. Kendall Turner, Wellbeing Lead at LexisNexis, who's helping shape how organizations embed wellbeing into daily practice. And Jakub Luczak from Future Trainee at Shoosmiths, representing the next generation of legal professionals. Thank you very much for joining me here today. So we will get straight into our questions. AI is reclaiming hours once lost to admin, but for many lawyers, those questions are simply refilled with more work. What does that reveal about the deeper culture of time and value in law? Is work-life balance a buzzword in law? Elizabeth, if we could come to you first. Long hours are often said to be simply part of the job. Have we normalized a level of overwork that's just simply unsustainable?
In a simple answer, yes. So I think it's well accepted in the legal sector, and not just in big city law firms in London, that long hours are part of the daily working life in law. And at LawCare, you may have seen we've just released a new study called Life in the Law 2025, where we looked at what is it about legal practice and working in legal practice that's undermining people's mental health. But also, more importantly, if you read the report, there are 5 recommendations for what could make a difference. But one of the things we looked at was work intensity. So we actually use a well-known measure for scoring work intensity, which was the number of hours worked, but also how intense that task was. And that scale runs from 4 to 20, 20 being high, 4 being low. And our sample scored 14, which is a high score, which shows that across our sample, which was over 1,500 people working in the legal sector across the UK, they are working at high levels of work intensity. And what we also found, we asked people about the number of hours they were working and how this compared to their contractual hours. And we found that over 75% of people were working more than their contractual hours, and 10% of them were working more than 21 extra hours a week. So we do have a kind of cultural norm in our sector that, putting in the hours is how you get ahead and how you progress your career. And the challenge is that working at that level of intensity does have an impact on people's mental well-being.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting segue into our next question and our next point. Do you think that has an intersex with ambition and overwork? Does striving for excellence often tip into burnout? And could you maybe detail any telltale signs?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So I think just a quick word on burnout. This is a phrase and a term that is being used a lot across the sector.
Yeah.
And I think we need to recognize that burnout is actually a recognized condition where somebody becomes emotionally exhausted and disengaged with work. So people experiencing burnout normally would not be in the workplace. They would not be able to function, but there is a pathway that leads to that. So what I'm going to talk about is that really. And I think one of the challenges that we face in law is that there's that legal mindset around perfectionism, that sense of self-sufficiency, needing to be responsive to clients practically 24/7. That drive to deliver is a strong sort of mindset and way of doing things within the sector, which I think many people would recognize. And it's almost seen as a badge of honor, right? And we celebrate people that put those hours in because that's what drives the perception of, high standards, delivery for clients. But, I think we need to be careful that when people are working at that level, that it doesn't move into a place where people become depleted and they're not able to sustain that. That kind of looks like people working extra or even longer hours to meet deadlines, neglecting their personal life, their hobbies, their relationships, the things they do that help them unwind and relax from work. You know, I think it's a common phenomena when we're under a lot of pressure. We chuck out of our lives the things that actually help us manage that pressure. So rather than go to our choir practice or play football, we cancel that so that we can respond to those 50 emails that we haven't got to yet this week. So, you know, and that sort of can lead people down to a track of feeling anxious and developing, you know, mental health conditions. So when you see the signs of that, and often we see it in other people sooner than we see it in ourselves, but, you know, it's people being feeling irritable, or taking much longer to deliver, or the quality of their work has gone down, their productivity has gone down, becoming detached from colleagues or from things outside of work. Those are all the signs that people might be struggling with their mental health. And we've got some guidance for that from LawCare on our website, the signs to look out for in yourself, but also in others. And also importantly, how to have a conversation with somebody if you're concerned about their mental health, because we often shy away from that for fear of thinking, well, I'm not a professional, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, what if I say the wrong thing? But actually there's a real opportunity, if you do think someone's struggling, is to have the conversation. It's not that you have to fix the problem. It's about being able to listen and think about how you could help that person, direct them to the other sources of help that might be available to them.
That's such a critical point, is you don't need to fix other people's problems. You just you need to be able to point and be another source of support and help. And yeah, being able to recognize it in other people is so crucial, not necessarily being able to recognize it in yourselves, definitely. Kendall, it would be great to kind of hear your point of view on the time-saving benefits and necessarily understanding if that's the point of AI. One of our contributors in our report said, it's not about saving time, it's helping us redefine how we spend it best. How can teams make that idea real?
Yeah. So firstly, I want to say that I completely agree with that statement. And to make that a reality, teams need to really shift their mindset from efficiency to working with intention. So the goal isn't solely to work quicker and do more and more and more. It's really about focusing in on how AI can increase our capacity in a way in which we can make intentional choices to determine what we do with that increased capacity. And that is what really defines the real impact. So encouraging teams to utilize AI to do the administrative, the repetitive tasks can increase the team to have focus on other things. So whether that is things like strategy, creativity, mentoring others, learning, or actually doing the things outside of work which are aligned to their purpose and bring them joy is really, really important. And it's all those things that do make us human, which AI can't give us. So in real terms, this could mean redesigning some of those performance metrics to include how people use their time saved and encouraging those conversations that focus on purpose. When a task is automated or it's completed with AI, what higher value or wellbeing orientated work replaces that time? And that's conversations that need to be had. And I think finally, in organizations, we often look to our leaders, and that's not necessarily just our leaders sort of, you know, in a more senior position. It's those people that we look to as natural leaders in the organization. So if they're modeling using that time well, then that helps others have the permission to do the same.
Absolutely. It's almost an AI influencer internally, isn't it? Making sure that it's your managers, it's your senior leaders and the cultural leaders as well. Definitely. Jakub, it would be great to kind of hear from you and find out from a junior's perspective. Do you think AI is genuinely freeing your time, or is it just changing the way you're supposed to be using your time? Are you just doing work quicker rather than rebalancing the way you're doing your workload?
I would say that probably, unfortunately, the second one. So I would say that the nature of the job changes with AI, but it is not necessarily a bad thing, because I think at the moment we are in this very interesting times when we kind of can still decide what direction we will align ourselves with when it comes to AI. And, you know, it is still not too late for us to think about how AI can increase our capacity and how we can be more productive and how it can lead to better work-life balance. So, for example, from a junior perspective, I used to work at Shoosmiths before coming back to studying, before my training contract. And for example, one of the examples I can give is that when I was asked by a partner to summarize some documents for a client meeting, I could use, for example, Copilot to do that work for me. And even if it is, let's say, 15 minutes, so you could kind of do this summary yourself as a junior, it is more interesting work to proofread a summary already done by AI and think about how you can still increase the value for the client and for that meeting, as opposed to doing it yourself. So there is this opportunity that by doing a different kind of nature of the task with AI, you are increasing the productivity because you're not focusing on the menial tasks or this boring aspect of the job. And as Elizabeth also mentioned about burnout, I would also go a step further and say that it is not just the overworking that leads to burnout, but also the boring aspect of our day-to-day tasks. So if we have the variety, if we can do more interesting things, then it brings us nicely to this balance where even if we work, let's say 8 hours, maybe longer, it can still uh, make our work meaningful and maybe not lead to burnout because we feel fulfilled and that our tasks are interesting as opposed to just something boring. And on the last point, just to finish quickly, I would also add that juniors usually crave that interesting work. We don't want to go and do our training contract or as a paralegal and do photocopying or other kind of tasks like that. We want to become the future professionals. So the more time we can gain to maybe put ourselves out there to do the legal research and other aspects of the job is ultimately benefiting for our future careers.
Absolutely, absolutely. As they say, a change is as good as a rest sometimes. Not all of the time. You definitely do still need to rest, but a change can be as good as a rest. Definitely. It's really interesting. Thank you. So our next set of questions. The legal profession, and it's a great kind of continuation. The legal profession has long equated output with value. Can a sector that's built on billable hours ever genuinely celebrate doing less as progress? Kendall, let's come to you first. What do you believe are the cultural signs that show a firm's well-being agenda is performative and versus really being embedded within a culture as a signs of real progress and real change?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a couple of things here to ensure that well-being is part of the culture and not just performative. It has to be measurable. We know in organizations that anything that is measured generally gets done and it has the focus that needs to be there. So including well-being as a key performance indicator or a key performance objective alongside profitability and client satisfaction is key. And treating AI and well-being as one strategy, not two, is the other point. So if AI improves speed, but it worsens burnout, it's failed in its nature. So the implementation hasn't worked. We need to link AI success to outcomes that we already have in the organization. So turnover rates, engagement, learning, growth, promotions, not just efficiency gains. It shouldn't just be there to do more and more and more without the balance of it really having an impact on the individual. And language matters as well. So talking about well-being, return on investment in the same way that you would talk about financial ROI is really important. And then I think the other piece here is going back to what I said in my last comment, which is about leaders role modeling that behavior, because if they role model sustainable working practices, it's then again a really key signal to the rest of the firm that is what we should be doing to have optimal, sustainable performance Otherwise, you're having a firm, send out all these really brilliant messages offering a program of work which is, fabulous and well intended, but actually underpinning that, if you don't have all these other things, you're saying one thing, but you're actually doing completely another, which is, I think sometimes that can be worse than, doing nothing and be honest about it. So it is really ensuring that it's measurable, it's talked about as something that is truly valuable to the organisation, and that our leaders in the organisation are backing that up by role modelling that behaviour.
Absolutely. And those are some really key kind of statistics to be able to track there in terms of turnover, in terms of employee well-being with sick leave and things like that. Those are some really, really key statistics to be able to track. Great. Thank you very much. Jakub, in terms of associates being able to prioritise increasing billables over the work-life balance, we've seen that regardless of firm size in our reports, that's a priority for associates. Do you think that they are any more or less ambitious, or are they happy to work longer hours to get ahead? Do you think younger lawyers are feeling trapped between wanting balance and fearing that they're going to be judged for wanting this work-life balance now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would say that as much as I believe there are definitely some people who are afraid, and it definitely depends on the culture of the firm. So as you mentioned in the reports and the data that you obtain, it's not the size. I would then say it's probably the culture rather than the size of the firm. I would say that the people I speak to and I had a chance to interact with would probably be brave and very open about their mental health and work-life balance and how valuable it is to them. And it kind of is a non-negotiable healthy standards in my generation and maybe also younger generations. So it's a good direction, I would say, for the profession. And I am very excited to see how it's going to change the legal profession in the future when my generation and younger generations become partners. And on that point as well, I would say that the legal profession is unfortunately still very competitive. So despite all of these kind of rational points, right, when you think, oh yeah, I want to have maybe family, maybe I want to have some private life, it's this conflict between performing well at work and also not burning out in the long term. Because when you think about it from our perspective, it's a 20 plus year long career at least, and you don't want to go into the profession and experience burnout at the very beginning. So from one side, you're considering all of these points, how I can prevent the burnout, as Elizabeth also mentioned, how I can recognize it, how I can have a conversation with my colleague if I can identify some of the early symptoms. And then on the other side, you also have some of the leaders who start to understand this, and whether it's for the right reasons, whether it's something they do morally, or whether it's, as Kendall also mentioned, sustainable and is the direction that it should be measured. And this is how we can achieve the balance between the two. I would say it creates the culture you're in at the end of the day. So as an associate, you have from one side this pull into this direction that you need to perform, you need to progress, and from the other, you also know what is healthy and you also know what the risks are, and you don't want to repeat the mistakes that you have heard about, read in the news, and you come more prepared to face them. So I would say that I don't think associates yet face as much of a pressure as the partners. And if I ask some of my colleagues, oh, so do you plan to become a partner? Most of them would say no, because they're aware of the pressure and they don't see the value for money in the partnership at the moment. So it's very interesting to think about it from that perspective when thinking about the associates and the progress, that what would happen if majority of our associates currently do not have an inspiration to reach partnership, because that would also redefine the model of how we work and how law firms function. And with AI being in the background, I think it's going to be very interesting in the next 10 to 20 years to see how potentially the hierarchy in a law firm is going to be redesigned to match the new standards that are good and healthy standards from the younger generation entering the profession.
Absolutely. Considering all of that, considering the uncertainty around career development for current associates, and the conversations that are happening around the use of AI and what to do with the time that it gives you back and things like that. Are you optimistic about the addressing of the balance going forwards, or do you remain cautious?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think that younger generations are definitely braver, and they are not afraid to challenge the status quo that is at the moment at law firms. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'm happy to be part of the positive change.
Excellent. Great stuff. Elizabeth, how do you think that we can help leaders unlearn the idea that well-being is purely indulgence? It's something that you do when you've got the time, when your workload is under control, rather than a real solid form of infrastructure. It's the nuts and bolts as much as Microsoft Word for how you type your documents.
I think that's a really great question, and it's actually one of the things that we address in our Life in the Law study. We make a recommendation that we want to see well-being prioritized sort of into the DNA of a firm in the way that other things are just a given. I think part of that, and Kendall's touched on some of that already, I think you've got to present them with the evidence. So the Mindful Business Charter have done a great report on the business case for well-being. So there's a ton of evidence out there already about how good mental health and well-being in your workplace has a positive impact on your bottom line in terms of productivity and retention and attraction of people. You know, as Jakub's already touched on, you know, I think you've got to be cognizant of the climate we live in now and work in now in 2026. It's not 1996 anymore. Things are very, very different. And, you know, against the backdrop of an uncertain geopolitical climate, and then you look at the evolving expectations of clients. So clients will have an expectation that firms will be using technology and AI to deliver efficient services for them. You've got the increasing scrutiny of the regulators, particularly around mental health and well-being, AML, cyber risk, financial risk. So the greater scrutiny on your shoulders as a leader from regulators and growing also from insurers, what it's speaking to is the risk you carry in your business around people risk. People that are stressed, anxious, approaching burnout are more likely to make a mistake. They're more likely to land up in making a poor ethical decision that could compromise the reputation of your firm or even the profession. It could be career ending as well. So I think it's helping people see the risk that not addressing mental health and well-being poses to their business and bringing that centrally into the risk register. And I think also it needs to be on the agenda for partner meetings. I mean, you tend to see mental health and well-being often gets relegated into an HR function, or it's part of someone else's job that has a wider role. And I think we need to recognize that it actually needs to stand on its own as a role that, you know, is actually business critical. And I think that leaders need to really recognize that they have, as we've already touched on, in a very hierarchical profession like law, how leaders behave and what they talk about has a massive influence on the culture and the rest of the organization. And I think a really fundamental part of this is actually around management and leadership training. So in our study, we asked people If you have responsibility for managing other people, have you had any training in how to do that? And about 53% had, which is an improvement on our last study when it was just under 50%. But we then asked them, if you manage people, do you have any accommodation made for your billing target, or are you given any additional recognition or support with that task? And less than a third of them did. What we got from our qualitative analysis from our study was that managers and leaders were saying, I'm expected to do this on top of my day job of billing clients. So we've got to help people see the intrinsic value of effective people management. So even in the world of AI, which is transforming the delivery of legal services, and it's here to stay. And I'm sure in 2 or 3 years' time, this conversation will be very different to what it is now. The pace of change has never been as fast as it is now. But, fundamentally, the law is a people business. AI are tools to help us deliver this work. And it relies on people's minds and their ability to deliver and manage this huge change. So recognizing that, if you don't invest in your people and support them well, you're going to have a problem. And it's Jakub's already said, we already know we have a sustainability issue. Our study found that over 50% of people would consider leaving their current job in the next 5 years. We also broke that down into 1 year and 2 years as well, with 30% wanting to leave the sector altogether. And we are seeing a pattern in younger people coming into the workplace. They have an expectation around mental health and well-being. They're expecting employers to have policies, procedures, and support, and for that to be visible. And they're also less likely to be hanging around for 25 years on that partnership track. There's lots of evidence, not just in law, across all sectors, that I think younger people coming into the workplace now, they're kind of staying between 2 and 5 years, and I think the average is around 3. So people have got to rethink the pathway of career progression. So I think it's about presenting the evidence to those leaders that ignore this at your peril, because whether you think it's an indulgence or not, a lot of people don't, and things are changing, and you kind of need to educate yourself and understand these issues. Don't just rely on what other people are telling you within the sector or looking elsewhere. I think you need to invest yourself, making sure you read the reports and you understand these issues so you can make informed decisions for how your organization is going to address this.
Absolutely. It almost seems like it's going to get to a point where it's get on board or get left behind, maybe. Definitely. Fantastic.
I think so.
Moving on to our next set of questions now. AI doesn't impact everyone equally. Are the benefits and pressures of this technology being felt differently by partners, associates, and trainees? What would a realistic version of balance look like in modern legal practice? Elizabeth, we'll come back to you first. How do hierarchies and stigma still silence conversations about stress and mental health? This is a fantastic continuation from your last point. How can leaders and managers model healthier ways to spend the time that AI gives back? Maybe we can continue talking about how they can also continue to unlearn some of the ideas that well-being is an indulgence. Maybe they can model some of these healthier ways to present well-being to their teams.
Well, I think it's despite the increased conversation and awareness and engagement around mental health in the workplace, stigma is still a massive barrier for people coming forward for the help that's available. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, those kind of embedded cultural norms in law. You work hard, you put in long hours, there's no room for weakness or error or struggling. So if you put your hand up and say, I'm finding this difficult, you will be frightened from doing that for fear of being perceived as weak or not good enough or not cut out for this profession. And the other part of your question around hierarchy, the law is extremely hierarchical, and we take our cues from how our leaders behave. So you can have the most fantastic policies embedded in your organization, but if they're not lived, eaten and breathed every day, and you see people behaving in that way, particularly people in leadership roles, then it doesn't really matter what those policies are, because you think, well, there's no point me speaking up about X because I've seen someone else do that and nobody took any notice. So I think that's a really, critical part of that, is that we've got to, leaders and managers really need to recognize that they need to, not just talk the talk, they've got to walk the walk as well. And I heard a great expression the other day about, I'd not heard it before, but I think it was in a positive sense. Leaders have a shadow, and you need to be aware of the shadow, how you influence the people around you, and be very cognizant of that. And I think self-awareness is also a really critical part of that. But I think they've got to model those behaviors. So if you've got a policy that people can work flexibly, or when they are on holiday, ideally they're not to be bothered, or they're not to be working, or you've got an agreement around respecting people's boundaries when there's a really busy time. If that's consistently not being followed, and you see leaders and managers breaking those rules, so to speak, then that signals that, well, it's all good and well, but that's not what happens around here. So it's echoing the same points, I think, from Kendall and Jakub. It's about culture, and culture is about behavior. And I think we really need managers and leaders to recognize that their behavior in the workplace has a massive influence on others. But I also think it puts leaders in a difficult position, because a lot of what we're talking about, we're turning to them to drive this. They've already got a lot on their shoulders as well, in terms of managing their own concerns and anxieties, or things that might be going on for them in either at work or at home. The regulatory framework, the increasing competition, not all partners are equal. Junior partners may feel less able to speak up to senior partners around a table. So I think we need to be cognizant that we've got to equip people in those roles to be able to do it as well, by supporting them and recognizing that, we're going to help them do this. So I think that's really key. It's really about behavior.
Absolutely. Sometimes maybe it just comes down to something as simple as redefining what the word strong is. It's not strong to suffer in silence. Sometimes speaking up is the biggest sign of strength.
It is. And also, also as a leader, I think, that old expression, you've got to fit your oxygen mask first, right? I think that's so important, that you need to be thinking about your own well-being and how you manage that. Because if you're not, and you go down, then other people are going to go down around you.
Absolutely. You've got to captain the ship at the end of the day. Brilliant. Kendall, how do you believe firms can design AI policies that recognize generational differences, not flatten them? Because we know we've spoken really in depth about how generations approach these differently, especially when we're looking at maybe things like associates, junior partners, senior partners, things like that. Could AI risk deepening the divides between those who control the tools and those who need to prove their worth? What's your take on that?
I think in the best case scenario, that firms are best to design with, not for, so including people at every level of the organisation in that AI rollout conversation, and ensuring that tailored upskilling for that AI literacy is available across the organisation, and again tailored to those who maybe have a different set of needs. And by doing that, it ensures that, hopefully it ensures that AI doesn't become the new gatekeeper of efficiency, ensuring access and recognition are really shared across the breadth of the organisation. And I think that then also, back to Jakub's point at the start of this conversation, enables those more junior individuals in the firm to do the work that they find most interesting, and hopefully then also enable them to move faster, should they wish, to the point in their career that they'd like to be at. And I think that with all of that, there's a need to regularly check in on how AI is impacting the culture, asking, how is AI empowering our employees? How is it proving the worth of what we're doing and how we're behaving, rather than, again, just doing more and more and more of the same. And, how you do that is by asking those questions in those conversations that you have, but also feeding it into any of the insight that you gain through your firm, whether that's an engagement survey or any other types of feedback points that you can have as well.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Thank you. Jakub, quick question for you. What aspects of work do you think are acceptable to spill over into the personal time, and what should be, if any, and what should be totally off limits?
I would say, obviously, in the ideal world, that none should be spilling into your personal life. But at the same time, we obviously know what the reality is. And I really resonate with a lot of points that both Elizabeth and Kendall just made. And I think that behavior really does shape how the workplace behaves. So having leaders showing that, for example, whilst being on annual leave, and let's say it's a partner's more senior individual, that it's acceptable to still stay in touch, to have that phone calls with the client, to not having full handover of your workload to your colleagues, kind of reinforces the same pattern over and over again, that it is okay to be interrupted whilst being away when you are more senior in what you do, because it only shows that you cannot switch off at all from working. And it's a very sad conclusion to get to. And I think we kind of need to start thinking about it in terms of personal values. So you will need to make a sacrifice at the end of the day and choose between a client and time that you spend with your family, for example. So if you are an individual who has boundaries and who feels that this is acceptable because this is within my boundaries, this is my value, I want to progress, maybe I'm younger, maybe I don't have many commitments, and this is something I want to focus on, is fine. But if you are not, then equally it should be fine, and you shouldn't be penalized for that, that you do want to have family time and that you do not want to sacrifice your whole life for work. And these are difficult conversations also to have with yourself. So I would say that one actionable point to be taken is that every law firm, in my opinion, should be able to reinforce the importance of mental health and well-being at internally at the law firm. So having representatives among partners showing that, yeah, mental health is important for me personally, is giving that example. And that kind of links with the point that Kendall made, that leading by example makes it different and then can actually change the workplace and change the culture by behavior, as Elizabeth mentioned before.
Great. Thank you very much. We are nearly coming up to the end of our session now. So if we could go to our closing question, and then we do have a couple of questions from the audience, and then we'll be at the end of our webinar. Thank you very much for your time today. So in one line each, we'll start with Elizabeth, then we'll come to Kendall, and we'll finish with Jakub. What does time well spent mean to you? What would it take for the profession to embody that? Elizabeth, if we could start with you.
I think time well spent for me would be time that's aligned with my purpose and, makes me feel fulfilled. So that sense that I've made a meaningful contribution to what I've been doing in that time. And I think to get the profession to understand that, I think it's going back to a theme that's run through this session, is understanding what drives people in the workplace. And sure, the financial reward is part of that. We all need to put a roof over our heads, and and in law, some of those rewards are very high. But actually, I think the evidence points to most people want a job where they feel they're getting purpose and meaning from it, that they belong in that environment, that they have colleagues that have become their friends at work. They feel they fit in. They feel people understand them. So I think recognizing that those drivers are what actually build loyalty and productivity and people staying with you would be really important. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you. Kendall?
So I think that Elizabeth said it better than I did, because I also, when I was thinking about this question, thought time well spent is truly about being aligned with purpose, and that being in all aspects of your life. I was just reflecting on Jakub's last answer, and I think one of the things I always come back to when things are really, really busy at work and there's a lot of things to get done is that in a week, a month, a year, I'm not going to remember what that thing was that I was so stressed about. What I will remember is that if I didn't have the chance to go to a friend's birthday, or I didn't have the chance to connect with my son or go to one of his, school events, that's the thing I'm going to remember. So I think time well spent, being aligned with your purpose, and it not just be about performative productivity, because I think that can then go back to that sort of presenteeism that we found was, permeated through a lot of organizations, particularly pre-COVID. And I think for the profession to embody that alignment to purpose is really having the courage to redefine what success looks like, and trust that the teams within the firm also believe that that is the right thing to do, and that they're able to redefine success together.
Absolutely. Definitely. Thank you. Jakub?
I would be very concise for the final time. I would say that the time well spent to me means that the future me is grateful and happy for the decisions and the time that the past me has spent. So I believe that if you come to this kind of conclusion, that you reflect, and that also Elizabeth shortly touched upon, that self-reflection is very important, that you have no regrets and you live your life through your values and can fully say that I'm very happy and appreciate how I did it before, is the key to feeling that the time was spent well.
Great. That's really interesting. Thank you very much. So just to finish us off, we do have a couple of questions just from our audience. Thank you very much for sending those through. So the well-being in their team is currently very low. They've lost some of the potentially more interesting parts of the job due to AI, such as researching, writing from scratch. They're now feeling a little bit like button pushers and just reviewing what is being produced by AI. Are there potentially some practical things that their staff, that they can do to increase well-being for their staff in this position? Are there any ideas to make well-being more than just a buzzword in this position?
I think that's a really difficult situation. I mean, I think I would suggest, and it may not be realistic, is actually having a conversation with your managers that, this example is what's going to drive people away from workplaces where this is effectively, if I'm reading it correctly, kind of feeling like your role's been replaced. And that, the knowledge and skill that journalists and writers people have built up over a career, and understanding how things land with people in the nuance of language. AI is not there yet in that space. And I think organizations, I know when I read a LinkedIn post that's been generated by AI, and we are seeing so many more of them. I don't even read them. I just think, oh, it's too many bullet points, too many. It's just written in a way that hasn't been written by someone. So, yeah, I mean, I would say have a conversation with the people in your workplace, your managers or colleagues, and say, is this how we really want to be using AI to just replace our skills and knowledge in this space? How can we use it to provide us with, the things we've been talking about, some efficiencies in what we do, but it doesn't take away from, our organic ideas and thoughts and expressing those. So I don't really have an answer, but I just find that quite a sad situation for somebody to be in. And I mean, dare I say it, may not be realistic, is, are there workplaces where they don't take that approach?
Sounds like there needs to be a bit of a value add there.
Yeah. I don't know
it's
what
a
other
new
people
type
think.
of burnout. Maybe there's a bit of a digital fatigue. Maybe there needs to be a bit of a workflow investigation. Where is the benefit of AI? Where's the value add here? Where is it's not just taking away the mundane, and it's actually interesting. It's adding some value. It's adding some new information. I think that's all we've got time for today. Thank everybody very much. Thanks for watching. Thank you very much to our fantastic panelists for their insights, their opinions. It's been fantastic. We will send a recording out afterwards. Do read the full report. Thank you very much. Thanks everybody for joining.